Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavors of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered, and contribute to the community forum. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our construction, tech, or weekly Global Passive House Showcase webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zack Semke, coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts this time.
Yeah, Boston. How's Boston, Zack?
Boston is awesome. I've had the chance to visit a bunch of Passive House projects. So beginning on Monday of this week with the Winthrop Center, which will be the topic of this conversation we're about to have, as well as a couple of projects in Salem and Gloucester. I'll go to one on Friday in Cambridge. So I'm doing interviews and capturing some video, and it's been really inspiring to see what's going on. Massachusetts is just going gangbusters for Passive House right now. So
yeah. But it wasn't just this Winthrop building that brought you to Boston, right?
No, that's right. My daughter is doing a week-long program. She's a high school student. She's doing a week-long program at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, which is about an hour away. So I got her to the program and then came back to Boston, and we're renting an Airbnb in the North End. On land that Paul Revere used to own, which is pretty cool. And my wife Anne has also joined me. Where all the kids are at summer camps, and so we are working from this Airbnb during the day and playing at night. It's been great.
Awesome, and there's some really great stuff to see there, which is very cool. It was pretty amazing hearing about this interview.
Brad is incredible.
My limited knowledge of Boston comes from watching Boston Legal. So I did have visions of James Spader and William Shatner as listening to you. Thought you might be sipping some whiskey on a balcony and looking across the horizon and the cityscape, talking about Passive House.
Oh yes, definitely. That's how I roll, Matthew. Yes. Definitely.
Yeah. But we'll get into that because it's a very cool project, and it signals a big change potentially. Certainly an inspiring building, and seems like they're wanting to have that as a bit of a beacon and an example of what can be for similar sized buildings. But before we get into that, let's thank our sponsors.
Yeah, absolutely. So our founding sponsors are 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingui Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minutair All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel and Rockwell North America, StoCorp, and Zola Windows. Our champion sponsors are Icon Windows and Doors and Proseco, and our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
Awesome. All right. Tell us a bit about this great. It wasn't just a sit-down interview. You actually visited the building and had a bit of a walk around. So, do you want to give us a bit of intro into your recording that you did while you were there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I walked from the Airbnb to the financial district of Boston on Monday morning and met Brad Mahoney, who is the director of business development at MP Boston, the developer of the building. And we rode up on the hoist up the side of the building, which was very exciting, to the 19th floor, and got off there, and there was some work going underway, so you'll hear some background noise. with the activities happening there. And we found this spot right next to these massive windows overlooking the harbor and the beautiful architecture of downtown Boston, and had this conversation together. Brad has been sharing about this project for a few years now, because of course it takes a while to build a skyscraper. I first heard about it and heard his story in Pittsburgh at the Passive House Networks conference there a few years ago. So it was really incredible to see this in real life, and it's well underway, and it's impossible to miss this building when you're in Boston. It's going to be the tallest building in the financial district of Boston. And it's making a really, really powerful statement about the future of buildings and the future of high rises and the future of, I think, all buildings. You just can't ignore it. And I hope everybody enjoys this conversation as much as I did. I have Brad Mahoney, who is Director of Sustainable Development at MP Boston, for a very special episode of the Passive House podcast, because we are on floor 19 of the Winthrop Center as we speak, which is so amazing. And so first, Brad, welcome to the Passive House podcast.
All right. Thanks, Zach. Thanks for having me. Excited.
So this building is an amazing project, right? It has 1.8 million gross square feet of residential, office, and retail embodied in this building. It's in the middle of the financial district of Boston, 691 feet tall, if I'm correct, and 812,000 square feet of that is Passive House certified, or will be Passive House certified, but fingers crossed, by the PHI, Class A office space, as well as standard, is it gold?
Well certified gold.
So and this is the largest Passive House office space in the world?
It will be the largest Passive House office in the world when we certify it.
So what an incredible role to be playing right now at MP Boston as the Director of Sustainable Development. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got here? And then we want to really describe where we're standing for the listeners after we do that.
Okay, yeah. Sure. Yeah, so this started, I think back in 2015, 2016, when we were talking about this project. And it really was this idea of winning a project, right? Which we ended up being successful on, and then putting together the program for what would be a next generation building, right? And how do you create that, right? And it's kind of embedded in this idea of high performance, healthy building, setting a new standard for office buildings across the globe, not just here in Boston. This idea of a global Class A. And it's centered on Passive House because of what everything that Passive House does, right? Directly addresses our climate crisis. It's a comfort standard, right? So the thermal comfort, acoustical comfort, high quality fresh air, all things that we've learned we care deeply about over the past 2.5 years coming out of the pandemic. So it's been certainly a fun journey, an adventure. We're in the middle of testing the floors, blower door testing with Passive House. And it's really about kind of creating a new typology, because when this started, 2017-ish, there was one Passive House certified building in Massachusetts. And we said, we're going to apply this to the office, the 800,000 square feet of office, because it really hadn't been done before. And scaling up from Roosevelt, Cornell Tech, which some of our design team members who introduced us to this idea of Passive House, Handel and Stephen Winters, had just completed or were in the process of completing. So scaling from 270,000 square feet to 800,000 square feet and applying it in a new realm, the office realm, was a big undertaking because there was a lot of unknowns. How do you account for everything? and hadn't really been done before. So it was, cutting new road and new path. And sitting here in 2022, it's especially exciting because it feels like it was absolutely the right decision.
I mean, it takes some real vision to be at a place in Massachusetts where at that time there's only one project, to be thinking about this really massive building, which is, I think, particularly exciting because it's just so, you can see it from everywhere. I mean, my daughter and I were just flying into Boston,
right?
And I was kicking myself because I didn't have my camera on in the window as we were flying across and looking at seeing the building. I was like, hey, Mika, this is that is the Passive House, and she's like, wow,
Right.
It's huge. And from so I can't resist. Boston is the what do they call it? The cradle of the American Revolution, right? And we always talk about revolutionary performance of Passive House. We can see, I think, from here we can overlook the site of the Boston Tea Party, right? which started. So I've just been thinking about like the parallels with this building in terms of really manifesting and demonstrating to the world and to the development community in particular the doability of Passive House and how Passive House can be this powerful thing for tenants.
Right.
So could you talk a little bit about that? Like this is a city of tech titans.
Right.
There's tremendous amount of, this is I think I mentioned a $1.35 billion building or something, more or less, right?
Right.
So huge investment. And I'm sure that you're hoping to command some pretty significant rents.
Right.
So why Passive House for office space in the middle of Boston?
Yeah, well, so to your point about Boston and the city, innovation, right? This kind of is fundamentally about innovation. And, why Passive House for the tenants? There are many different reasons, right? Not the least of which is everyone wants to go to work in a place that directly addresses the thing that we're all seeing around us, right? Climate, right? Yeah. How do you feel that, right? Do you feel that every day? Are you directly contributing by going to work in a space that is the most energy efficient solution for an office building? Are you directly contributing in a positive manner to climate by showing others that I really believe in this, right? It's part of my core values, part of our company's core values. In addition to wanting to, work in a space that has tremendous fresh air, higher levels of fresh air than existing buildings, right? The acoustical, thermal benefits, comfort benefits are embedded within Passive House, right? So when we decided to take Passive House and say we're going to stretch it a little bit and apply the other healthy building standard, WELL certification, it wasn't a big reach. And so it really was that kind of walking hand in hand with our tenants. And we've seen a lot of positive feedback based on that. Because when they're out there competing, when we're out there competing and you're looking at the existing building stock, an existing Class A building on average uses 150% more energy than this building will. And that's significant. Our carbon reduction goals, right? You've heard of Local Law 97 in New York City. City of Boston recently enacted some very aggressive decarbonization goals aimed at specifically existing buildings, tying in new buildings. And so that puts Passive House in a very good spot, right? Because it kind of pushes you almost to 2050 where, you're kind of in that realm.
Yeah, great points. And then we're also seeing this great resignation going on. I think it's what it was called, with all sorts of workers reevaluating what's important to them. And how do you think that might impact the success of your work attracting tenants here? Is there a connection there?
Well, I think we started this project with the goal of kind of creating a talent magnet. We not only went to, I was telling you earlier, we took a trip to Germany to meet PHI Darmstadt to meet the Passive House Institute, tell them who we are. We're developing this as a speculative office building. We did not have an anchor tenant at the time, and this is what we're doing. We also went to the Edge in Amsterdam to try to understand why people wanted to go to work in that building. And it was kind of those fundamental links that said to us, this is what it's about. And so as we sit here in 2022, hearing about, tenants that are, or employees that are leaving, right? Are they coming back to the same industry, shifting industries? We think this building will directly address that because of everything from climate, healthy buildings, even the simple layout of the floor allows it for, robust natural light. Basically 95% of the floor is within a couple steps from the perimeter, right? Natural light. It allows for neighborhoods to be created, which as office gets reimagined coming out of the pandemic, allows tenants to directly address, those concerns that will bring people back, right? That'll bring that social fabric of working back to the office.
Yeah, no, it makes so much sense. It's really compelling. And so let's describe where we're standing for people who are listening.
Okay.
You mentioned natural light. There are floor to ceiling windows all over. This is a very generously glazed building. So it is proving that a passive house building can be a very glazed building. Right. So, and this is it's massive, this floor that we're standing in.
The totally floor is 38,000 square feet, right? We're in what we call the bustle area, which is overlooking Federal Street, South Station. You can see the harbor. And the other side of the floor plate overlooks Charles River, Cambridge, Devonshire Street. And so that was part of our passive house journey, was understanding the facade. How do you maximize your views, right? That's really what I take away from it. How do you maximize your views, right? Because not all views are necessarily created equal, as you know, right? Here we are, right? Wonderful shot. So you want to kind of focus, like you said, that 10-foot high glass in those areas. And that's what we did. We did extensive studies with Handel, with Stephen Winters, understanding how we could be impactful and positively, impact a tenant's layout, tenant's designs, with the passive house design.
So the building is about 1.8 million square feet, right? And roughly 800,000 of that is passive house. And that's the office portion. Right. Most of the rest of the building is residential. And then there's also a retail element to the building. And
a couple levels of parking below grade as well.
Got it.
Right.
And the residential is not passive house, it's LEED. Right. It'll be LEED gold, right? So tell us about that. What was behind the decision to structure the building that way? Yeah,
sure. So when we started this, the largest passive house building in the world globally was Roosevelt Cornell Tech. Yeah. At around 270,000 square feet. So when we were looking at the commercial office, we said, we want to apply passive house there, because it had been done at much, much smaller scales, maybe 30,000, 50,000 square feet. We said, look, we want to create a new standard, and we want to apply it specifically to the office, the 4,000 people coming to work every day, right? And quite honestly, to scale from 270 up to 800,000 square feet was a big undertaking, right? There's a lot of risk because it just hadn't quite been done before. But we studied it extensively, created a full digital library to kind of understand everything that we're doing to ensure that we could embrace it 100%. And so that kind of scaling from 270 to 812, to add on the additional 500,000 square feet of residential at that time, it felt like too much. Yeah, it felt like, sure. We wouldn't be true to ourselves if we were to, take on the whole building.
And at that point, LEED Gold was tried and true, right? And passive house is, in some ways, at this scale, passive house is still new.
You would just want to check my reference that there was only one passive house certified building back in 2017. I was quoting someone from the state who mentioned it in the conference the other day, but
Will do.
but I'm sure that
very,
it was
very few. We get very few. Yeah, that's fair. So how about some of the geeky details? What is the biggest difference between the passive house segment of the building and the LEED Gold portion of the building in terms of the detailing and design?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest detailing is right here.
Yeah.
Right? It's the facade, right?
Yeah.
It's the facade. It's everything from the depth of the mullions, the amount of insulation. One thing you can't tell from the camera, but there's a third layer of glass, triple glazing. But the amount of insulation that's embedded within the facade behind these mullions, this insulation at the head and sill, to really achieve passive house levels of insulation, R18, at the opaque, at the spandrel levels. And that's kind of what I would say our biggest lesson learned through passive house, starting from the outside in, starting with the facade, right? Because that's really the simplicity of passive house, in addition to some of the other tricks, lack of thermal bridges, having good thermal breaks. It's really kind of keeping what's in and not letting it out. And so it's really the facade.
Tell us about the approach to the mechanical systems of the building and how you're feeding or servicing
different parts,
two very different uses,
right,
and two very different approaches to building energy performance.
So basically, if we have a building that's 691 feet tall, halfway up the building, above the office but below the residential, we have a full floor that's all mechanical. It has all of the chilled water, all the hot water, has all of the fresh air, and it's delivering it both up and down. So we have one heating and chilled water plant that distributes chilled water and heating hot water vertically down to the office and retail space below the connector, as well as up to the residential portion. And the basis of design is really a fan coil system, right? So it's a tried and true, simple coil with a fan blowing over it. That chilled water, heating hot water flows into that system. And what we did in the office portion is we wanted to take the passive house approach and allow us to tune it down even more on an office floor plate, right? So we have 4 distinct zones where fresh air, chilled, and heating hot water come down. And we look extensively at the neighborhoods that we have and make sure that we have one service per neighborhood. Okay, so it allows, if your company is not here operating in the bustle, well then that zone right over there can be tuned down and turned off, right? Use less. And so the simplified approach of one set of systems that's serving both residential and the office, it allows for some synergies. So like the traditional office that goes home at 6 o'clock, residential is just coming home. Okay. So the plant is running.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah,
serving the residential, right, while the office is using less of a load. Yeah. It also allows for some other benefits, right? Commercial benefits to tenants. One big thing, that we get asked is, do you charge for overtime HVAC? We don't charge a premium for overtime HVAC because that chilled water and heating hot water is being generated anyways for the residential. So you get paid your normal rate, not an overtime rate, right? So there's a benefit to that. In that driver, the 4 zones that's something that distinguishes this project from other projects where you may only have 1 or 2 zones get dropped in. So you're bringing larger ductwork, larger piping, kind of dragging it across the floor. Whereas here, it's really kind of a focalized approach.
It's almost like district heating, a similar concept, right? Where certain parts of the building need something and the other part doesn't. And yeah, right. It's one of those examples when you expand the scale and diversity of uses, and then you can really take advantage of some efficiencies.
One of the complexities with this is just making sure that we set up the metering scheme correctly so that we can monitor exactly what we're using. So, it's a complexity, but it's a simple setup, right? It's just drawing out a diagram saying, okay, can we measure total chilled water, heating, hot water flow? Can we measure the flow for the office block? Can we measure the flow for the residential block? And then you kind of break it down on a smaller scale. And so we're able to do all of that through the use of, our Eversource utility meters, electrical check meters, and BTU meters.
I know that you're really busy. You've got to be. You're helping to create this $1.35 billion building right now. So I know that we're short on time. I have just one last question, and that's I'd love to hear you reflect about why you're doing this work. Why is this important to you? What is motivating your work here on this building?
Well, I think when this started, it was this belief that we're contributing positively, right, to the built environment, showing that there's a new breed of building that's coming, and we're going to help lead the way. And as every year has gone by, we've kind of seen the need for this more and more, right? So on a personal level and professional level, to feel like you're positively contributing to that, you're helping kind of redefine how buildings can be energy efficient, right? And also be beautiful. I mean, so it's kind of, it's a win-win. It hits home, right? You and I were talking earlier, we both have children that are growing, and we all kind of think about that, right? And we think about the user that's going to be in this building, right? How are they going to feel? And if they know the story, they're going to feel good.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well said.
All right.
Well, thank you so much.
All right.
Really
thank you, Zach. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Take care.
And that was Brad Mahoney with you in the Winthrop building in Boston. At the outset, you said that you went took a lift up to the 19th floor, but you gave us some numbers there at the top. Approximately how far up the building was that? Because that was by no means the top, right?
That's about halfway up. Yeah. It's
right.
Yeah, the commercial was near the top of the office building space, and the office portion of the building, which is the passive house portion, and then above that, a couple floors above that is the floor where all the mechanical equipment is, and then above that is all the residential spaces.
Can we post some photos of your trip so people can check out
absolutely
what you were looking at?
Yeah, definitely.
And if people look up Winthrop Building, they'll see a whole bunch of images there of a very large looking building.
Definitely, and there's an article that Jay Fox wrote for the Passive House Accelerator magazine that I'll do. Awesome. I'll include a link to as well. It's a really great primer about the project and shows some great images as well.
It does stand out, but it also doesn't stand out in the way that it looks like another building in the commercial district. And you mentioned that it does look fairly modern. It's a lot of glass, which might be surprising to a lot of us.
A lot of glass, yes.
but it works. You know, they've done it. They've been to Darmstadt. They've done the homework and pretty committed to making it work and get certified. So it stands out in almost the way that it doesn't stand out from an aesthetic point of view, but it certainly stands out from in its size.
It does.
Which you did just to put those into metric terms. You mentioned of the total floor area around 812,000 square feet. So that's approximately 75,000 square meters for those of us used to working in decimals.
A rational system.
Yeah. And I think do you remember what the R value of the walls that you were looking at?
Oh, I don't remember.
I think it was around 16 or somewhere around there. So the general conversion there is around 5 or 6.
Oh,
so
right.
R16 would be about 2.8 in our terms. So that's a decent size. I mean, it's not excessive. What's the, for those that haven't visited there, what's the climate like in Boston?
Well, Boston gets really cold. It gets cold and windy in the winter. So the real focus of this project, even though it's a really big, a lot of big buildings, passive house buildings, you start really focusing on cooling. But what Brad was sharing was that because of the cold climate, it is really still heating. That is what they're really focused on, and what was it? Squashing the heat load of the building.
Yeah. It would be interesting. I'm sure a lot of our listeners would be really keen on deep diving into a lot of the technical aspects of a passive house at that scale, because you get all sorts of interesting things happening with that size of vertical differentiation. You get some different pressure effects, and you get different internal loads, which he talked about with the different systems for both the residential spaces and the office spaces. So it became, and he mentioned he was testing the floors, and that also made me think, it's not like a house where you maybe do one intermediate blower door test if you want to check halfway through, and then you do a final blower door test at the end. I imagine there'll be a lot of blower door testing going on at various stages throughout this build. It would be a very interesting project to look at all of the elements that are required from the insulation, the air tightness, the heating and ventilation, and the impacts of working in that sort of vertical space of a skyscraper.
And we're going to have an opportunity for people to take that deep dive at a upcoming construction tech edition of Passive House Accelerator Live. So I'll share the details of that as well in the show notes. The date, and the builder will be sharing her work on the project. So
that's great.
That's great. And we also we're hoping to create a video that captures, because we were also at the Passive House Network's tour of the building a week and a half ago. So and there were 3 tour leaders, Brad and Kathleen and I'm forgetting the man's name from Stephen Winter. So we'll have lots of great insights, hopefully, from those guys, if I can figure out how to put it all together into a cohesive piece.
Which is great, because what it does have in common with a lot of passive house projects that we often talk about is the willingness of the team to share, and for it to be an example for other buildings of similar size and similar use, which it was great to hear Brad talk about that and really wanting to show leadership, and I got the sense that this wasn't just a project in its own right that would do that and then that job done. It was more thinking about this as, how do we create more buildings? How do we use this as an example of what modern office buildings can be? And also, it's really nice to hear people like Brad point to Passive House so strongly as a solution for things that are really top of mind, particularly right now, being climate change and health, and people being very conscious of things like having a healthy supply of fresh air. And Passive House, you're almost asking him, why Passive House for a building like that, and his response was almost, why wouldn't you? Because it is providing a solution to so much of what is top of mind right now.
Indeed. And they made the commitment to do Passive House as well as the WELL standard, which the WELL standard and Passive House play really well together, because Passive House already gets you a long way there already. They made that commitment before COVID. And so when we, after the interview, we were down at back of the street, and he was relaying how folks on the team were coming to him, during the COVID pandemic, and being like, asking, well, what do we do? Like, what do we need to do? And his response was, we're set. I mean, this is we're doing what we need to do because we're going to have this superior indoor air quality that no other buildings in the city have because of this approach.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
So I think that it was serendipitous, but they're really well positioned, and I think that also he was reflecting that the tenant marketplace has really evolved in the few years that this project has been underway. That initially they were talking about Passive House with folks, and they'd be like, "Well, why would I want to do that?" And now things have really, the landscape has altered in many ways because of COVID. Partly because people are concerned about health, also because of this, that whole the Great Resignation thing, and people feeling like they want to do something important and worthwhile with their time. So the office being kind of a manifestation of the values that I think people are kind of coming in tune with.
Well, I'm really pleased you asked that question, and I think that's a really interesting response to it, because you could easily think, why would someone be investing $1 billion plus in a building like this when everyone suddenly decided to work from home? But there's a couple of things there. One is that might change. I know that people in our office have been quite keen to, certainly some people enjoy working 1 or 2 days a week, but they also enjoy and realizing that they perhaps do quite like aspects of going back into the city and socializing and having conversations that you wouldn't otherwise have. But also, I can imagine that a place like this, once it's complete, would be a really nice place to be.
Yeah,
like any Passive House building, it's going to be warm in the winter, comfortable, healthy. So it may attract people there as a productive, healthy workspace. And who knows, that there might be shared working spaces, different types of environments, but it still lends itself to that. And we're not going to stop having office work needing to be done. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. But I thought that was an interesting part of the conversation, thinking about the Great Resignation and people shifting values around what they want to be doing with their lives, but also recognising the importance of where they work and how healthy that environment is. And I really like that. It's a good reminder to people, if they're talking to clients, that things like Well and Passive House do play nicely together, and they don't necessarily have to choose between one or the other. Indeed.
Yeah, you mentioned, going to this office is not like, dragging yourself to the sort of faceless cubicle that you're whatever, this is a beautiful, beautiful place. And with these, everybody's going to have great access to these views in the natural daylight. And so it's definitely, it's going to be a pull, it'll be a pull for people.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably we don't need to go into it now. Really looking forward to diving more into the technical aspects of that, and I'm sure a lot of people are. Particularly that plant, I thought it was really interesting to have that embedded between the layers, between the residential space and the commercial space, and recognising the different use profiles, the different needs of those spaces throughout the day, and but also different ventilation rates and power usage, the need for sub-metering and knowing what the flow rates are of various services to those different zones, and being able to change zones, because you don't want to be heating or cooling that whole building, those tens of thousands of square meters, if there are parts of it that don't require it at certain times of the day or throughout the seasons. So really interesting from a mechanical services point of view. But I also liked when Brad pointed out that it was really the thermal envelope that was the key component. The mechanical services are needed, but the thing that makes it work really well as a passive house, like any passive house, is the thermal envelope.
Indeed. And that's the main difference between the lead portion of the building, the lead gold portion of the building, and the Passive House portion is essentially the quality of the envelope. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Well, it sounds like a good field trip.
Yeah, it's been really fun, and it was great, really great to connect with Brad. It was gracious of him to offer to do this interview on site up on the 19th floor. That was a really great surprise.
Pretty special. Oh well, well done for making that happen. It's exciting. It's good to know that, because often I look out and I see cranes on in cities and think, oh gee, are they, is they building anything decent underneath those cranes? And it's nice to know that there are some really amazing buildings that are going up, and buildings that are contributing positively to the environment and to the people that are going to be working in them. So awesome stuff. All right, what have we got coming up?
Yeah, well, there's lots of stuff happening in the Passive House world, and we'll include a link to our weekly roundup of those events in the show notes. At the Passive House Accelerator on Wednesday's Passive House Accelerator Live, which is Thursday for you in Australia and New Zealand, we will have a project showcase edition featuring Will Simons and Scott Kennedy of Cornerstone Architecture based in Vancouver, BC. And they're going to be presenting about First and Templeton, a 60-unit residential apartment and townhouse development in Vancouver. So don't miss that. And we'll see you soon.